Recording. Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have Rafal on, I always say that wrong, on my podcast, and his last name's a little too complicated for me to say, but I'll let you say that one.
It's Matuszewski. Yeah, nobody gets that right.
Basically, cut the shit, get fit, and that's pretty much what this whole podcast is about. It's 100% real, cutting the bullshit. And today we're going to dig into how training and exercise goes beyond just getting stronger and building muscle, because we start a program, we want to change our bodies, and then we tie exercise to just this means of changing our body. And we can get caught up in, for example, the best way to burn the most calories, or just doing bro training. And then you see, here's an example. You see your general guy walking around the gym and he looks like he's carrying shopping bags all the time. Like, that's the posture he's left with. But then put him into a normal environment at home and work, and he's dysfunctional, quote unquote. And then there's your general female who probably will, I don't want to say generalize, but there are females that will only do things that they like, which can be squats done the wrong way, hip thrusts like this, which a lot of the time it's very quote unquote quad dominant, and there's no real work on the hamstrings themselves or any other body parts that need that work. So then they become very quote unquote dysfunctional in daily life. So I guess that's the long and short of what I want Rafal to talk about. In a quote that he put up is, not focusing on the fundamentals is a shortcut to injury. And then I kind of linked that to another one that he said, which is, a long habit of not thinking a thing is wrong makes us believe that it is right. And I loved that, because one of my quotes is, you give the problem a year, maybe 2 years, 3 years, but you're only trying to give the solution 1 week, 2 weeks, 12 weeks. And you find it hard to believe anything you try to maneuver your way around, because this long habit that you've been thinking is false or thinking is true still stays in your mind. And we feel like it's supposed to be easy to change. So I'll let you take away how those apply to your approach to training, to exercise, and kind of touching on my introduction.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot to unpack there. So I'm gonna try my best, and maybe I'll kind of start it off and then we can kind of bounce back and forth. But I think for me, anytime I take on a client, either in person or online, I always want to kind of get a base of where they're at. And I always start with some sort of assessment. And the other funny thing too is, when I take on a new client, I always ask them, have you had a personal trainer before? And all of them say yes. And then my next question goes, well, why aren't you with them right now? And it's usually bad experience, or they got injured, or they didn't see the result that they were looking for. And then when I start digging deeper, probably 99% of all the clients that come to me, they've never even had an assessment done on themselves before personal training, which is kind of crazy to me, because it's if I don't know how a person moves, then how do I give them a certain exercise at all? So I start with an assessment to see like an example is your squat looks like a melted candle. The last thing I want to do is put a barbell on your back and hope for the best. It's not going to get you anywhere. But at the same time, if you chat with any trainer, doesn't even matter where they're from, their experience or anything, and you ask them does your programming and workout methods work? They're all going to say yes. You're never going to meet a trainer saying no, my shit sucks, man. I don't get anyone better. And when you look at general population, no matter what kind of stress you give to their body, they're going to adapt to it to a certain point. And then when you get into that intermediate where you're trying to I want to deadlift 200 or 300 pounds, I want to do 6 bodyweight chin-ups, you'll eventually hit a plateau where doing random workouts from your trainer, or you doing a boot camp class hoping to achieve those goals, you'll kind of hit a plateau before you can actually see huge success. So I kind of always go down to the fundamentals And it's like, does your shoulder move like a shoulder should? Most of the time it doesn't, because all of us sit at a desk like 8 to 10 hours a day. And then you go to the gym and you hope that you can press overhead without anything fucking up. So that's like one example. And I kind of go on the side of like, let's, build a good foundation and base. Kind of like if you decided to join karate, you're not going to do black belt stuff right off the bat. You're going to start with the white belt stuff, build the foundation. So then when you want to do the cool things you see on Instagram, then your body's ready. Hopefully that kind of started a convo, if that makes sense.
I love that. And one of my close coaching friends says that she hates the term you need to earn something, but honestly, it's almost like you need to earn a deficit, but you do need to earn your exercises sometimes. And people think that a barbell is the answer for everything. And I've said this before, a barbell back squat is highly overrated. Like a barbell front squat, for example, is highly underrated. And there are other ways to load things. Like for me, because I'm 100% online and not all my clients show me videos, I go off past experience, but at the same time, I'm not going to give them a deadlift straight off the bat, and unless I know that they can do it. And I'm not going to give them a squat script straight off the bat. Like there's goblet squats, there's front squats, there's box squats. And a lot of people don't know how to open their hips the right way, I would say, for a squat. But the quote that you just said that I loved is, you don't just give a karate person black belt moves. And if you can apply that into the gym, when you're on social media, are you looking at beginners training? Are you looking at people struggling and fiddling about with their feet, not being able to do lunges or split squats? Like lunges are one of the most advanced things for anybody, let alone just doing a split squat. And a lot of people that I see, or clients especially, is they feel like they're a failure because they can't do a split squat. And it's like, no. It's just people struggle with this shit because it's hard, and you won't get better at it without practicing it. But people aren't going to put their fails and their struggles of learning exercises online. And most people who are beginners aren't even online. So why are you trying to be like these masters that are balancing on one foot? And I don't know whether you've been seeing those crazy, that guy that's always on that pull-up bar, like pull upping random shit. Like, why try to be some master already when you haven't even got really good at the basics?
Yeah, I think people like, one, they think they're a lot fitter than they are. And you'll see this a lot where, maybe in high school or in college, you were like a stud runner or football player, and then you get a real job and you start sitting at a desk 10 to 12 hours every single day for the last 10 years. And you're like, you know what, I should take care of my health. And then you go into the gym thinking that you can still do the things that you used to do. And then you quickly find out that you can't. And then it's just kind of a square peg in a round hole constantly. And you're like, I don't know why this shit doesn't work. My back always hurts when I work out after, 2 to 3 weeks consistently. And like, people just need to go back to the basics. And even like, I always make the example too, is like, there's so many different pieces of equipment in gyms now. Like, I feel like every 6 months there's some new gadget. But if you like look back in the history of strength and conditioning, like people got strong 1,000 years ago with like nothing. So you don't need a new toy and balance on one leg while there's like fireworks going in the background. Like, you don't need the fancy shit. Like, it's simple stuff.
People want to train for the entertainment, and it's hard to blame the people when it's something that's promoted online. Like, even this is something that you mentioned as well that I wanted to bring up with, yeah, okay, cool, but even those that train with personal trainers and don't get results, maybe because like there's only 2 trainers at my gym that I like. The others I look at and I try my best not to judge them. But every single time they have this client or this particular client, every workout is different. There is no progression on the same shit. Like, how can you get good at something when you did it for 1 week, maybe 2 weeks, and then you changed it up the next week? Like, personal trainers want to make it feel like they're giving the best bang for the buck, so the client keeps coming for these new workouts. I'm going to smash you on the leg extension and give you like all these crazy drop sets, because I've never had a personal trainer per se, but when I had one, when I was very starting out, just for like my first introduction session, I went through like 10 drop sets of leg extensions, supersetted with these walking lunges body weight. and I felt like I was just hammered and I couldn't walk anymore. I was like on the floor with sore legs. And then in bed, I'm like, oh my God, that must have worked. My legs were sore. And that's what people attach to good shit.
Yeah.
But with the implementation, because I want you to go into that as well, it's cool. Now all these gyms are getting these glute drive machines. I hate them as an example because I don't even feel my glutes working on those. They don't work for my mechanics. But people like putting fancy shit where it doesn't belong. But then on the other end, Rafal and I were talking before the podcast, people then go bashing things because it's not optimal for this, but it doesn't mean that it is completely obliterated out of context. Like the frog pumps, for example, the abductor machine, for example, all of a sudden everyone's bashing the abductor machine because it's not working your glutes. Yeah, so usually it's the external rotators of the glutes that people have at their weakest. And for me, I need the abductor machine because I can't open my knees up against force because I injured my hamstring and my hips got all wonky from that. So I'm trying to open my hips up against load while I'm trying to strengthen my hamstring.
Yeah, and like even like the whole idea of people kind of chasing after, glute growth and glute exercises, sometimes you kind of go down a rabbit hole because like you're constantly doing all these hip extension exercises, but nobody knows if your hip can actually extend the way it should, right? Like, do you know how much active, range of motion you have before your lumbar spine takes over? And most of the time people have not the great hips, and then they're, facing the cable machine with the little band around their ankle and they're doing kickbacks and it's all lumbar spine and nothing through their glute. And like if you look at like biomechanics, like a perfect hip for hip extension is 20 degrees. Anything beyond that is just all lumbar extension. So really a lot of those videos that you see people pumping their legs as high as possible, you're not really getting that much glute activation. And then on top of that too, like in order for your hip to extend, you need enough capsular space, which requires a lot of hip internal rotation, which most people don't have. So then you're again going through that square peg in a round hole constantly, and you're like, why aren't my glutes growing? And it's like maybe structurally you don't have the anatomy to actually do it just yet. So let's maybe work on those things so you can actually get the glute growth you're looking for.
But that shit isn't fun. It's not sexy. That like this was my issue because people like this is not going to make sense to a lot of you guys, but think about what do you call those things? Like those animals that look like a saxophone.
No idea.
All right, let's just think of a saxophone. You have the saxophone and it's facing you. You have that plane of motion, which is your frontal plane. But no, sorry. You have that range of motion, which is your sagittal plane. And I'm like, whoops, wait. No, you have that range of motion, which is your sagittal plane. And that's what a lot of people are moving in and out of, which is just like the hip extension, this, that, and the other, which is what I was doing pretty much all of lockdown. And I found that I can't squat, I can't deadlift properly, I can't hinge properly, I can't activate my glutes. I hate that term, sorry. I can't engage my glutes. You don't need to activate your glutes. I can't engage my glutes in the exercises that I'm doing because I just spent 8 months of lockdown not moving in my side to side plane, which is my frontal plane. And who wants to do lateral lunges? Who wants to do bloody Cossack squats? Who wants to do the boring shit that isn't just lifting heavy ass weight up and down? It's people feel like it's a step back to need to regress. And you mentioned this, like, yeah, okay, cool, you were fit and all that during high school, but then shit happened. Same with lockdown. Yeah, okay, you could lift all the weight, you could do all those things before, but then lockdown happened. Then what?
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to like what's the person goals? Like a lot of times people kind of just get into exercise for the sake of moving, and then that just becomes like, well, if you just want to move, then it's really easy to kind of keep doing that. But if people had like specific goals that they want to achieve, and I don't know, for me at least, like the people that I work with, I get a lot of broken people and all their major thing that they want to do is like, I want to be pain free so I can exercise. So they're a little bit more bought into the whole idea of like, let's work on the fundamentals. But a lot of times when people don't have clear goals, they're just moving for the sake of moving. And then it's like, well, it doesn't really matter what you do, just move. But I always kind of lead people in the direction of like, let's actually write down some specific goals. And a lot of times I try to gear, especially women, towards like performance goals and not so much like, let's weigh you and measure you. And they get obsessed with that rather than like, again, I train like 99% of my clients are all moms. And I always give them goals of like, it'd be awesome if you could deadlift your body weight and also do a body weight chin up. And in turn, you need to like aesthetically look a certain way to be able to do those things. So like training towards performance ends up kind of giving all those aesthetic goals that you're thinking in the back of your head. They kind of just come along for the ride. And then that kind of gives you more buy-in and also, longevity when it comes to training.
It's almost like you don't realize when you start training that these things could happen or that you could get these injuries. Like if you keep pressing in a certain way, you'll end up having like a sore shoulder down the road, and now you have to regress even further because it's not sexy. And it's a really good point because I see it in the gym where like these young people probably around my age, but I call them young people because I'm so used to working with like older ladies, but they come in, they're smashing themselves with all this shit, they're doing comp preps and they're talking about how drained they feel and how much their life is suffering. It's like people are willing to do the stupidest, dumbest, most sufferingest, that's a word now, sufferingest crap when they're younger, and until then what? Like there comes a point where you realize, okay, now you're going to have to backpedal a lot because your engine's fried, your oil is leaking, and all these other things need addressing. But you spend 1 hour in the gym most of the time. You spend most of your time outside of the gym. So what is it that you're doing most of the time outside of the gym? Is it repetitive movements of moving the one arm? So then you end up having some arm, some shoulder, some scapula, some elbow, some wrist issues later on down the track. But you never really addressed that in your training because all you wanted to do was grow your glutes and friggin' squat 100 pounds. Like people don't think outside of what training can actually bring them. And yeah, I'm going to leave that there before we move into the mobility stuff. Actually, there was something else that you said I want you to bring into that, which is in a highly complex system like the human body, which is kind of like when we talk about metabolism and this system and that system, it's the same with the body. Like you can't just look at how one muscle moves without looking at it in the whole system, because there is no one exercise that just targets that one muscle. Like there are other things in the system. So I'll let you incorporate that.
Yeah. So I kind of like over the last like 6 years kind of moved towards more like, say if someone's doing a bicep curl, there's probably a lot of other shit that has to happen in order for you to do that movement. So then you're kind of leaving a lot of stuff on the table if you're just kind of doing the bodybuilding split. And then if you actually go into the history of bodybuilding when Arnold was a really big name, this whole idea of like splitting up your body was just for him to like, if he saw that his calves weren't big enough, he would dedicate a whole day of training for just his calves to catch up to the rest of his body. But then that kind of got diluted into the industry that you should do body like splits to get growth. But then if you follow people like Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, who actually does research on hypertrophy training and like any kind of muscle building you can think of, it actually shows in research that you're better off doing full body rather than splitting things like bis and tris or like chest and back, whatever you want to call it. So sometimes it's like people will just fall into, I saw this one post on Instagram, so that must be true. And they don't even like read the whole caption. And most of the posts that will state stupid things won't even have a full like write up of why they're saying that thing. But that's a whole nother story. But kind of going back to the whole idea of like training a body as one unit, you kind of get more bang for your buck. Because when you go into like any everyday situation, because like with the people that I train, moms, they want to be pain-free taking their kid out of the car. And there's a lot of things that have to happen in order for you to do that without effing up your back. And then you take that kid in one arm and then you're grabbing like 13 bags of groceries as you're kicking the fucking door down to actually get into the house. Like your bicep curl day or your freaking tries and quad days probably not going to give you the best thing to produce that movement. And anytime I do an assessment with people, like one will go through, can your hip demonstrate certain movements? But then when I take someone through all the ranges of motion that your hip can do, and I always ask the person, like, out of 100%, and 100% hip is the best hip in the world, where are we sitting at with you right now based on that movement? And I usually get an answer from 40 to 60%. And I'm like, okay, so we have a 40% hip and you're going to the gym doing a full hour leg day. You're only going to yield 40% of all that hard work you're putting in. Why not focus on getting that hip to like 80% so then you can actually see the results you're looking for? And the moment I kind of lay it down that way, people are like, holy shit, I am wasting my time without like doing mobility work or actually focusing on the stuff that needs to be addressed.
That's a really good point there as well, because people just, it's almost like the dieting mentality where you feel like it's working, or you feel like the harder you work, you should be seeing results. So you keep pushing down that same pathway when the cogs are starting to fall off. And you mentioned this part before as well. We sometimes need to regress things, but at the same time, we don't know that at first a lot of the time, because it might not show itself until we start to add load to it. Then some faulty mechanics, some faulty movement starts to appear. And people are easy and quick to gravitate to cheap programs and anything online that is just like a lot of what I see, Lauren Simpson and other people like that. It's like doing cardio and doing circuits that are exhausting you, but it's also a lot of the time in the same plane. Like there is not a lot of quote unquote functional movements. And the term functional itself has got so battered that I have to quote and unquote it all the time. But functional literally means it allows you to live life. Anything that your body can do and that's good for your body is functional. Wouldn't you agree on that one?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but single leg movements, people hate that shit. So what do? They want to just go on leg press and press as many as they can there. And then what's that going to do? Jam you up in a more crouched position so it's not opening up your hips. And hip extension is the one I always see butchered. But people try to address the issue at the issue's point. Like, for example, if you have a sore back, let's foam roll the lower back. That's probably the worst thing you can do. You probably agree on that one too, because there is no lower back muscle. So you're pretty much foam rolling your spine. It's your glutes, it's your hamstrings. And this leads into my next question around foam rolling, stretching, mobility work. But most of all, how sometimes doing those things can make the issue worse if you don't even know what the issue is. Like, are your hamstrings tight or are they taut? And is foam rolling it going to make it worse, or is it going to make it better?
Yeah, so foam rolling is an interesting one. Like, it's been around for a while now, and like you can go to any store and pick up a foam roller. But again, I think in the beginning, a lot of people kind of shifted towards like, okay, foam rolling is going to fix everything. It doesn't really. Like, you feeling tight is your nervous system's putting an emergency brake on your body for a reason. So I'm more curious about, why is your body making you tight? Because when you foam roll, you kind of put a sensory like feedback loop, a loop of like, you don't have to keep that emergency brake on. So when I train clients, like I'll spend maybe 5 minutes, if that, on foam rolling. So then they can communicate to the nervous system to give them a little bit of range. Because if they've been sitting all day and I don't let them foam roll and they say have a reverse lunge, that quad and hip flexor is probably going to feel pretty shitty. But if we foam roll the quad, hip flexor, TFL, those kind of things, and then you go to a reverse lunge, it's probably going to feel a little bit better. But then again, like I've also had clients where they bruise really easily and there's no sense of me trying to foam roll when they literally get bruised. Like foam rolling doesn't fit into every single person's program or anything like that. And sometimes I've had people that have been in car accidents and that's too much sensory information and it overloads their nervous system and they feel terrible. So you kind of have to figure out if it's a right protocol for you. And sometimes people foam roll because it's just a habit now, right? Like if you've been foam rolling for 10 years and you haven't improved your tissue quality, probably working. But at the same time, it's like if I have a client coming in and they absolutely love foam rolling because it feels good and it makes them feel better and it makes them feel like they're ready for a workout, I would not take that away from them, right? And like, I don't know, like I can foam roll my back at home and I feel great. I don't want to take away that feeling because it's, again, a sensory information. But the thing too is like a lot of times when trainers get into the whole like, oh, foam rolling is going to fix everything and they give that to everyone without kind of a health history, I've heard horror stories where like one trainer had a client and they're like, oh yeah, I'm always like super tight in here and there's like a huge bump, and they're like, oh yeah, take this lacrosse ball and just like smash the shit out of it, and it was actually like a cancerous cyst on her back and it broke open. So like you need to, like, there's another reason why you should be taking assessments and intakes is like to learn the person's health history so then you can make a better protocol for that person, right? So it's not a one size fits all, but typically I would say at least 80% of people, foam rolling is kind of good. Again, like the more I read into research, I'm like, I don't even think anything works.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's like it's what's good for that person. And it's another reason why I hate programs that people just get online. Like with me, I always start off, depending on the client, with something that's pretty basic for them, so I get to learn them and learn their feedback. But it's up to you to put your feedback into the workouts themselves, because if we don't know where you're tight, if we don't know what you're struggling with, then it's not something that someone online can see from the other side of the internet. Like, are you tight? Are you sore? What are you actually feeling? How are you actually connecting to this, connecting to that? And this also ties into stretching because it does my head in. People, like, you need to know the purpose of why it is you're foam rolling. Are you going to foam roll your bloody hamstrings before needing to train your hamstrings? That's probably a really dumb idea. But if you want to train your glutes, yeah, cool, let's foam roll your hamstrings so they aren't the ones that are active. Like, what exactly does foam rolling do? What does stretching do? It kind of disinhibits it. It kind of softens the nerve impulses. It kind of, like, I'll let you explain that part with the stretching so that people can understand that sometimes if what you're doing before your training is counterproductive for what you want to get out of your session, you're not really going to get out of your session what you were hoping for.
Yeah, and like I think with stretching in general, people just assume that, okay, I'm done my workout and I'm going to do 30 seconds of this stretch and I'm done. But if you ask like any flexible, say, dancer, and you ask them, how did you get flexible? It's like, well, before class, I put my foot on the giant bar across the mirror and held it for an hour and then I switched legs. Like that's where you actually will see tissue change, where you'll get more flexibility. But then there's a whole nother realm where I come from a Kinstretch and FRC background, where in order to create tissue change, you need external force. So if I can get someone in a 90-90 position to work hip external rotation, and usually you want to hold a stretch about 2 minutes, because that's literally the time when you look in any kind of research where the stretch receptors kind of turn on and they're like, I'm waiting for information. And that's where in Kinstretch or FRC, or even the practitioner side, the FR, is where we would create an external force internally where we do an isometric contraction. And sends a signal to all those stretch receptors to finally get the information to influence the tissue that we're trying to open up or, make it a little bit better. And a lot of times, if you look at rehab research, if you ever tore your rotator cuff, you go to physio, the first thing they get you to do is hold your arm out to the side at 90 degrees They take your hand on the top of the injured arm and you hold for 10 seconds, relax. Then you go from the bottom, hold for 10 seconds and relax. And all you're doing is a low level isometric to send to the tissues that are affected to get stronger. And in order to create long lasting flexibility where you have active control, you have to kind of combine the whole idea of like just holding a stretch and then also creating an isometric contraction to kind of create tissue change. And that's where like the money is. And I always find that when I take someone through, again, in the Kinstretch world, it's something called an FRA, called a functional range assessment, to see the capacity of each joint. When we compare passive and active, there's a huge discrepancy. And if I can get someone up to their, like, say, their passive range of motion with their active, then they become like a monster in the gym. And I've seen Kinstretch instructors like take this science to like the extremes, and they're able to do like single leg squat jumps with an inverted ankle and not tear anything. So it's a lot of like misinformation online, or people again kind of falling into that habit where I just need to stretch for 30 seconds at the end of my workout and I'm good. But most of those people don't see any improvement in mobility.
Yeah, and it's even worse if you're doing that stretching. That's something you don't actually want to do unless it's something you need to do to free up something. Like, for example, there are some clients that I start their workouts out with couch stretches. And I also go by the 90-second rule because it's 90 seconds to 2 minutes. You said 2 minutes, so I'll say 2 minutes. But I always went by the 90-second rule where you hold it for 90 seconds, maybe do it for 2 rounds. But why am I getting them to do a couch stretch? Because they can't engage their glutes in an exercise. So I'm trying to loosen up the front of their body so that it isn't in this jammed place, so then they can actually hinge and use their glutes. Like, the issue isn't the fact that you can't activate your glutes. It's that everything else is overfiring. Your glutes are already active. They're just not able to do what you want them to do when everything else is firing in all cylinders. And that's the same with your hamstrings. They're tight because they're not tight. They're weak and they're lengthened because your hip flexors are so tight. And something you said I absolutely love, the stretching part of it. It's, yeah, cool, but what does that bring you? It's not saying that you can load it. And this is why program design is an art. And this is why training load in the lengthened ranges is important. And this is why you can talk about tempo as well. Tempo has not everything needs to be freaking tempoed, but it has a place. Like holding the bottom range of a front foot or a back foot elevated split squat, holding the end range of a Romanian deadlift, holding the end range of a lat pullover, holding the end range of like the chest flies. Like, there are parts where you need to load them for it to get the impact. And what I learned about stretching is you need to get the stretch, yes, and you need to hold it isometrically, yes, but you also need to add load to it. And then you also need to add a resisting force and try to fight that resisting force so that you're strengthening it against opposing forces. But then that's only going to last temporarily. You then need to load that in the gym and load that same movement pattern. So this is where people get so confused, which is pretty much what he said, but I just tried to make it applicable in your mind, like visualizing it. That is pretty much exactly what he said, if that made no sense to you in a gym term. But like this passive and active stretching, it's, yeah, you can move it there, but can you move it there under load? And how important is this when it comes to joint health, when it comes to hips, when it comes to shoulders? Bring in the tempo as well, because tempo sucks, but it has a purpose. Like, tempo bloody sucks. Like, holding a bottom of a Bulgarian split squat, yeah, no thanks, mate. But how are you holding that? Are you just holding it mindlessly? Like, the importance of intent as well, because it's like, are you holding it for the sake of holding it? Or are you holding it and actually actively squeezing the muscles and getting the stretch the way that you should be getting it to get what you want out of the movement, sort of thing?
Yeah, and like you bring up a good point, because like having intent with each exercise is huge. And for the general population, they're almost like they have no connection to their body. They almost become like they're living outside their body. And when you ask them like, how did that exercise feel? They're like, oh, I don't like, they don't even know what the feeling is to exercise, if that makes sense. Like, say, yeah, you're doing a barbell hip thrust and you ask them, where did you feel it? They're like, nowhere. And you're like, okay. And then you have people too, where you try to give them something like, I don't know, a step up, and you want them to use their opposite hand as they step up. And they have no idea how to do that opposite arm and opposite leg connection, to a point where you're like yelling at them, like, opposite hand up now, left hand up now. And you're like, you still don't get it. Okay, cool. Or like something as simple as crawling. Like, people have no concept of like how to do opposite arm, opposite leg. And that's a very natural movement for us, because when we walk, your opposite arm swings in the opposite way of your leg. And for some reason, when you have to slow it down, like a step up or a crawl, your brain is like, I don't know what you're telling me to do. So a lot of times when people, like general population people, want to start exercising, it's like, why don't we again focus on the basics, or learn how to feel what you're feeling? Because a lot of people don't know until you start cueing them in a certain way, or finding verbiage to get them to engage their lats. And like, the thing for me, when I teach someone how to deadlift for the first time, I always use the cue of hiding their armpits. And they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And that makes no sense to a trainer, but to a person, they're like, yeah, that's how I activate my lats, is by hiding my armpits.
Something I see a lot, I want you to expand on this one, is people who overthink form to their detriment, which is really annoying, because I see it with guys. I have a guy that does it and it annoys the crap out of me, but he overthinks his form on everything. Oh, this feels good, but is this form correct? Everything is about form this, form that. Is this exercise looking how it should look in a textbook? My biggest pet peeve, because you're not a textbook, and you're never gonna look like a textbook, for one. And for two, when I asked him, I don't want to see videos without you telling me what you're focusing on, one, where you feel it, two, and why you're showing me the video, not just for a form check, because there is no context to that. Because you still are repeating the same thing with every video in what he says and the way the videos are, and having the same issues in his head around form, without focusing in on, okay, but how are you executing it? What are you thinking? I can't fix a pixel on a screen without knowing what's going through your head. And like, finally got him trying to do it. He's like, I don't know what I'm thinking. I'm just lifting to do the exercise, to just lift it the way an exercise should be, his words. And I'm like, how should an exercise be? Lifting the weight. No, but how? How? What muscles are you using? What are you thinking? He's like, I don't know how to explain that. Like, because we are so, like, there are so many people that just want to chase what they think they want. Oh, I want to be a strong powerlifter. Oh, but I also want to build all these muscles. Oh, but I also want to do these crazy gymnastic shit. Okay, but I hate this word, where is the dysfunction in your body that's stopping you from doing these other things? Because now your shoulder hurts, now this hurts, and now it's a complex matter that I know that you can try to like pull apart into different directions, because that's the case with a lot of people.
Yeah, like even with form, like, yes, there is a certain degree where you want to do an exercise somewhat decently. But then at the same time, there's a lot of people that just don't have the prerequisites to demonstrate a certain exercise. So sometimes it becomes like, can I find a different tool for the job to get the same outcome? Because I've seen it in so many gyms where like I'll walk through a gym and I'll say someone's hip thrusting, and like you can see in their face it does not feel good. And I'll like go to them, I'm like, does that hurt you? And they're like, yeah, I only feel it in my low back. And I'm like, so then why are you doing that exercise? And then they don't even have an answer for me, because it's just like the program they downloaded, their friends doing the same workout, or they saw it online. So a lot of times it's like, just find, a better tool for the job. If the goal of the hip thrust is to get better glutes, there's like thousands of different exercises that you could probably do that's not going to hurt your lower back.
I want to add one thing to that.
Sure.
People being married to a certain piece of equipment, and it's like, oh, but why can't I barbell deadlift? Because we haven't fixed your hinge pattern 1, and we haven't fixed your leg drive number 2. Why do you want to use a barbell? Oh, because it's how deadlifts are done. That's what powerlifters do. Or what, I don't even know. I'm just thinking of random things that they could say, but people stay married to the same equipment when you're rushing the process of learning how to do something when you don't even know how to attach to your body. What do you usually say around those things? Lead that into what you were saying. And also, when you see a lot of people using most of their lower back because they can't engage their lats, or when they do any type of like deadlift pattern and it's all coming from the back, they haven't yet learned how to engage. Let's talk about the same example with that guy, for example, someone that's like that guy that doesn't know how to like actually engage these other elements of their body. Like, what goes through your mind with that?
So it all kind of starts, again, kind of going from the fundamentals. Anything with powerlifting in general, I want to know what their bracing strategy is. And when I get those people, I'll ask them, what's your bracing strategy? And they're like, they think I'm speaking a different language. And I already know that the exercise is too like advanced for them. So I'm like, let's see you breathe with your diaphragm. And it becomes all this chest breath into their neck. And I'm like, so you have no low back stability as you deadlift or you back squat or when you're bench pressing. So let's work on utilizing your diaphragm first, which is then is going to play a role of how your low back feels. Because if you look at, again, anatomy, your hip flexor literally attaches underneath your diaphragm around T11, T10. So if you have a better functioning diaphragm, it's going to loosen up the tension and within the fascia around the insertion point of your hip flexor, which then will give you better hip extension and no low back pain, which then will make the deadlift feel better, right? So it's like you almost have to reverse engineer every single exercise to get to the root cause of why someone may not be doing it correctly.
That actually just rang a bell that I didn't think of for ages. I don't have a textbook perfect deadlift, and I never will, because my body isn't built like a bloody textbook. But I do have my back rounding to some degree. But no matter what exercise I do with my really long freaking femurs, I never, ever, 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 ever feel my back sore, ever. I feel my upper back sore because I'm so tight up here, and I feel my legs because I'm using my legs. But it just connected that I've learned how to brace properly. But people still, like, you can say use your diaphragm. Okay, cool. What does that mean? I'm just thinking about breathing into my stomach. I'll let you take that away with the brace.
Yeah, like I always use the analogy of like if you take an unopened Coke can and you place it on the floor, you could step on top of it with your whole body weight and it's not going anywhere because of the compressed air in a cylinder. And that's essentially what you would want to achieve with your breath to kind of create that cylinder effect. But the moment, say, you open up that Coke can and pour a little bit of it out and then step on it, it just smashes. And that's essentially what happens if you don't have a good bracing strategy trying to deadlift or back squat. So one, I take a lot of time in the beginning stages to teach people how to breathe, then teach them how to brace. And that kind of progresses into other exercises. But when I have that brace, it then like spills into like, this is how you do a bird dog, because most people do bird dogs just through the motion and they look silly and they're like, this is easy. But when I coach a bird dog, people will tell me this is the hardest thing they've ever done. And I'm like, that's how it should feel. Same goes with the dead bug. It's the same motion, but it's like, if I can teach that bracing strategy into the dead bug, people are like, holy shit, this is the hardest dead bug I've ever done. And now that they have that feeling, it's like same feeling now in the deadlift. And now they have all the tools to now fight off any kind of load that they put on the bar to a certain extent. But it's like people don't take the time to do it. And sometimes, like, you know, people think of their diaphragm when you take that big belly breath, it only pushes forward, but also your diaphragm pushes out to the side and also behind you. And if you can't get that full cylinder effect, then you're going to have some sort of energy leak somewhere and you're going to, again, hit a plateau. And if you look at some of the best powerlifters in the world, they even went down the rabbit hole of figuring out what the hell their pelvic floor is to check if that's also working order. Because then I kind of look at diaphragm and pelvic floor as like the two buns of a sandwich to come together to give you that stiffness that you need.
Yeah, that, like, you can, I used to say focus on actually like you have like pregnant belly or like you're constipated. I used to think of that like you're constipated type of thing and you're trying to push it out. But then that never really worked because then the butt started going out. So then it's like you want to breathe into your lower back, but like we said before, it's a whole complex system of everything, and you can't brace without your lats being in the picture. Your lats are so freaking important in all of this. Like, people underestimate how important the lats are in pretty much everything because of the fascia that's also on the lower back. Like, I feel my lats when I'm squatting, and I can get really freaking sore lats just from squatting. And I'm like, why the hell is my back sore? Like, it's just like, when you know how to brace, you have all these systems working together, and it's kind of hard to coach until you become aware of your body. And for me, I love giving people the J-band lowers, the J-band leg lowers.
Yeah.
So I love giving clients those, because if someone says this is easy, I don't feel it anywhere. It's just like, it's almost like a dead bug. You don't know how to brace. Like, you need to, I call it, you need to reverse crunch. Because when you reverse crunch, you're forced to actually engage everything around here, and it all gets really tight. But if you can't connect, like you said, your arms with your legs, how are you connecting your system of your body? So I want to try to tie this up in a direction that is applicable for people to put into their programs, into the gym, and how the importance of all these little things. I want you to bring tempo in. I forgot to bring that up. How the importance of all these little things factor together to create a system in your mind when you're training, where it's not just let's move the weight. Because most people who haven't had a proper coach or a proper trainer, they don't know how to actually train whatsoever with intent. It's all about just moving weights. It's all about just moving things as fast as possible. And you see it all the time in the gym. Like, things aren't moving in the full range. And cable rows are done like this, not with the, like, and then that just made me think of something. And then there's the false belief that you need to have your shoulder blades still when you do everything, without actually letting them bloody move the way they should, which was a mistake I used to make myself.
Yeah. So to kind of tie that all in, because when you brought up tempo again, it's like, one of the arguments I always make is like, if someone was married to the back squat and their form is terrible, they don't have the mobility restrictions for it, I could take the strongest guy in the gym who has terrible mobility for a back squat, give him the heaviest dumbbell for a goblet squat, get him to squat down with a 4 Mississippi count on the way down, hold at 90 degrees for 4 seconds, and then shoot up and do 8 reps. That's going to destroy them more than any back squat with shitty form that they can do. So sometimes it's like, you are kind of taking a step back, but not really, but you're just focusing on the weaknesses that you need to build up to. And then if you look at even like Dr. John Russin's work, where in order for you to back squat, you should be able to goblet squat half of your body weight for 25 reps. If you don't even have that prerequisite, you have no business back squatting. So then, like, when I think he put that out like 8 years ago, there were so many people that tried it and they're like, that's the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Right. So sometimes, like, it may seem like you're taking a step back, but then, yeah, you add tempo or some other kind of thing for programming that can actually make something simple very difficult. Right. And like, even with deadlifting, if I have someone super married to the barbell deadlift and I can convince them otherwise, I will then try to compromise where I'm like, let's elevate your deadlift, because most likely your nervous system doesn't understand that you're going 4 inches higher off the ground. It understands force and load. If I can add force and load to your deadlift, you're still going to get the effects of getting a stronger deadlift. And if the person's like, why am I doing this? It's like, it's going to help relieve the tension of your low back, and it's going to work within what you have. And as long as you're not going to compete in powerlifting that most people in the gym are not doing, you're fine. And then they're like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an issue that a lot of people have as well. They're like, as soon as I do some different variation of something, but now I have to drop my load. I'm like, I don't give a shit if you have to use just the bar. Oh, but that is always like, it really isn't regressing in any sense, because you can't really progress where you are anyway, because you actually said this at the beginning. So let's bring it all the way back to the start. You learn things from you go about doing the gym in a certain way, blah, 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 over the years. And you learn your patterns over weeks of doing something, if you're learning faulty patterns, that's what your body remembers, that's what your body learns. So getting it out of those faulty patterns takes the same amount of repetition, same amount of work. And if there are bottlenecks somewhere, how are you going to get past that plateau? As we were speaking about plateaus, how can you get past that plateau if you're not going to address the shit that's actually holding you back? For example, when I used to do powerlifting, how could I have got past I was stuck at, I don't know, pounds, sorry. How could I get past the 175 kilos that I was stuck at for almost a year if I didn't then regress? I was freaking struggling at 80 kilos. So 80, 175. 80 kilos, I had to do the deadlift on the way up, and on the way down, I had to hold it at my knees for 8 seconds for 8 to 10 reps. And I was struggling with an 80 kilo bell with weights, 80 kilo weight, when I was easily doing 175 or 150 for reps. Like, yeah. Oh my God, I'm just doing light weights. I'm just doing baby weights. Well, how could I have got my 185, 187 after that if I didn't regress it to do that shit? If I didn't spend, like, I wasn't deadlifting for a long time, normal deadlifting, because I had to work on this other stuff. Oh, but I need to deadlift because you need to stop being so married to exercises. And another one is, like, for example, the rack pull. I have to hold it at the bars and still keep tension in my body, which, here's another thing Tempo does. It teaches you how to keep tension in your body. I had to do that for 5 whole seconds. And someone who can rack pull a lot, doing that with 60 kilos because it was killing me. But regression. So there's a really good thing with Tempo as well. Maybe you can filter that into how, as the title of this podcast is called, how training and exercise goes beyond just building strength and muscle. It's movement, it's medicine. And the thing we didn't touch on, which can kind of sum this up too, it's also longevity.
Yeah, like it's kind of interesting that we're going to talk about this because I get a lot of questions from my clients like, what am I training for? And I'm literally training for life, that when I'm 80 or 90 years old, I don't need a walker. And I think that's what a lot of people should start kind of looking towards, because like I've seen people age and I've trained people in their 70s and 80s. And I'm like, I don't want to be like that, where I need people helping me get up out of a chair. Like, I want to be able to be fully retired and still travel and still pistol squat and be pain free. And a lot of times, people just think, no pain, no gain, but it's going to suck, because I've seen patients, because I also work within a clinic, where people are in their early 40s and now finally are financially free and everything fucking hurts. And I'm like, that's just terrible. And you end up using all your money that you've saved up for treatment, where it could be spent on trips or experiences or whatever it is. So I'm literally training for longevity, that when I'm older, I don't have to worry about, like, I need a hip replacement, I need to get PRP done on my shoulder so I can go grab a cup out of the cupboard. So being able to train for something like that, and at the same time, like, I still love deadlifting heavy, and I've never had low back pain when deadlifting. Like, those are some good goals. And I think a lot of people, especially in the fitness industry, like our industry is terrible for this, is like, there's one extreme or there's nothing. It's like you either look like a figure competitor or you're a couch potato. There's nothing in the middle. And it's so, like, weird to me. It's like you comparing, like, you want to play basketball, but you're comparing yourself as an NBA player, and you're like, oh shit, if I can't play like that, then I'm not good enough to play at all. And that's what people in the fitness industry do. They want to start their fitness journey and they just compare themselves to the top elite people. And it's like, well, fuck, no wonder you're not motivated to go to the gym or eat healthy, because you're constantly comparing yourself to those people that are like the 0.1%. Like, you have to kind of be a little bit more realistic of what health and fitness success actually looks like. And again, train for longevity, where, ask yourself, how do you want to feel in 20 years? You trying to back squat to a quarter depth with 225 on your back and it feels terrible, probably not going to get you there.
I absolutely love everything you just said. Guys, if you listen to the podcast a couple of weeks ago called hashtag the one you need to listen to, everything Rafal just said is literally what I said in that podcast. Literally, because a lot of the time we stop ourselves starting because all we see on social media is what we feel like it should be or what it should look like, and we're nowhere near there. So we set ourselves up with an entry level that is a black belt mentality when we haven't even learnt our first kick. So that was probably the best summary. I'm not even going to add anything to that. Go back 10 minutes and listen to the last 10 minutes of this, because it's that mentality that stops a lot of people being consistent, because they feel like they should already know how to do things. People already have it easy. People are mastering things already. Like, yeah, I could get given something new and I can master that probably in a month compared to a year, like a lot of other people. But that's because I've mastered everything else over 6, 7, 8 years. Things get easier to master the further along you go and the more you can make connections, almost like when you're in school. You might start a new subject, but you find it easier to pick up because you can relate it to all the other subjects before that, kind of thing. So with that, I cannot thank you enough for coming on. And it's been a while since we had a little podcast chat since our one together, but so much has changed and so much has been spoken about in the meantime, especially on his Instagram, with a lot of functional anatomy and muscle diagrams, which are kind of important for people, but they are boring for people. So you need to kind of readjust your meaning of boring and helpful, because if you don't know how a muscle works, then it's kind of hard to imagine exactly what it should be doing when you're exercising. So you can't exactly do the cueing. Like when you're doing a lateral raise, you don't want to lift your arm up. You want to think about where the actual delt is and focus on trying to get the delt to do that thing. So go check him out. It's at Cut the Shit Get Fit, and he has a podcast with the same name, which is him with a lot of short tidbits on really good shit, including anatomy, back squatting, joints. Pretty sure you do quite a lot on mental health as well, which is really damn good. And that's exactly what I do with my podcast. So with that, is there anything you want to leave them with?
Other than like for anyone that's struggling with training or motivation, just remember that motivation's a feeling, just like being happy or you can't be happy 24/7, 365. Like it comes in waves. So if you're ever on that low wave of not feeling motivated, just know that it's going to come back up and then just crush life.
I love that. Ride the motivation waves. Thank you so much for coming on. And don't forget to give this podcast a rating, because I'm trying to hammer that home now. And you will listen to me on the next episode.